being there. Take one for ACAM. And then we can.
I think like one of the things about Dad was that he was such like a giant person in the room, and
in more ways than one.
but like nobody knew. I didn't even know. I mean, he participated in so many things when I was a child and did so many things for us that I wouldn't have known the difference until I experienced it when he attempted that second time. And then kind of going back after knowing, I realized that maybe there were some things that I just didn't pick up on. I mean, I remember the night that 5 years old, I remember his first attempt, and I clearly remember that night still. I didn't see him or anything, but I remember the police officer coming in the room, Nana was holding me, and, that, to, in hindsight, that made sense to me after knowing.
Right.
But I wouldn't have known that as a kid.
No, being so little, how would I tell you that? How would I explain that at 5 years old to where you'd understand what was going on? And that was, you were 5, so we're talking 6 years of already dealing with that. Because Daddy, when I met Daddy, he showed no symptoms, no signs, anything through our whole dating relationship and engagement and whatever. And it wasn't till a year after we were married that in North Carolina where it first came out. And I had never dealt with someone. I mean, my Nana, great Nana, had some mental issues, but not like that, and never dealt with it. So having to put him in a hospital a year after we were married was something that I'd never experienced. And trying to wade through the waters and figure out what to do. I was by myself because we were in North Carolina and everybody was in New Jersey. And, even calling, Dad's family and Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Rocco and Aunt Dorothy got in the car and were there the next day. But I was essentially alone trying to figure out who this person was that couldn't get out of bed, that was laying there crying, that couldn't function when a couple of days ago he was fine. And once we put him in that particular time, and that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. I've never been to a mental ward. I'd never been to a mental hospital. And in the military, they're even more different than a regular one. The only thing I likened it to was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like, I really expected to see people in the straitjackets, so it was a different situation, and yet when he came home and was, I wouldn't say cured is the word because I don't think you ever really cured, but learned how to function again and live with it. He was again, the life of the party, and no one in the military knew. Nobody knew. Katie and Brian knew because Katie was my close friend there, and we would talk, but there was nobody in the military that ever knew any of it, and Mary and Doug.
That
and
I think was
kids.
part of the stigma is certain things like that the military doesn't always
Exactly
appreciate certain things about people, whether it's mental wellness or sexuality, anything like that. I couldn't think of the word.
Don't ask,
but,
don't tell. In the military went far beyond sexuality.
And I think from what I understand, when he was in Iraq, that was something that was also hard because he didn't want to like have his medicine in front of people or anything like that. Like,
again, yeah,
because of the stigma, and that I think contributed to it for him. I don't know if things are any better now in the military, but that certainly for Dad was a part of, I think, why he did a lot of the things the way that he did them.
Yes, and they have changed a lot of their protocol with mental wellness because they've had to, because there's, I mean, look at, I don't even know how long ago it was, Vietnam and 40 whatever years ago. PTSD has been around a long time. and yet the military would not recognize it for the longest time. And part of Dad's diagnosis when he came back from Iraq was PTSD on top of depression and whatever. But that was not something that the military talked about that. And yes, and that was why he did. He squirreled his medication prior to knowing when he was going. So he wasn't taking it properly before going because he had to save enough to be able to take it there, knowing he couldn't get a prescription. And that plan kind of backfired on him. It didn't work. And he ran out of it while he was there. So therefore, there were days where he didn't have his medication. And it all spiraled until he got sick again there. So, it's a cycle. It's a vicious cycle. But if there wasn't the stigma with it, both military and quite honestly on the outside, then there would have been no problem to just, it's like coming out of the closet with anything else. Come out and just say, I have mental illness, I suffer from depression, or everybody tells you they suffer from anxiety. That's like the best mental illness you can have. But
it's hard to do that, not just like because of the stigma, but it's also kind of tainting people's views of yourself sometimes. I mean, I'm sure that if Dad had, in his bubbly self or whatever, had come out and said something to people, like, I don't know how they would have reacted. And he, I think, was a sensitive person in trying to not please everybody, but he did. He had a lot of friends and he didn't want to disappoint anybody, and there's all of that also surrounds the mental health part. But I mean, you've had more experience with it than I did, and
Dad was the life of any party.
I know.
We all know Dad was never quiet.
No.
Good song came on and Dad would be Ralph Cramden just dancing on the dance floor with his two left feet, and everybody, that's the side everybody knew of him.
Yeah.
But the other side, except for very close friends, Joe, being one of them, that, nobody else really would see that side. So they didn't know coming home, he'd come home and he could sit in the recliner and just do nothing. Or lament. His favorite thing to say was, I have no friends. And meanwhile, he had a ton of friends. He used to say all the time he wasn't a good dentist, and yet people referred people to him. And I would tell him, nobody's going to refer someone to you if you stink. But he couldn't understand that when he was in that place. When he was in a good place, he knew that.
Yeah.
Then he had the self-doubt and didn't want to be a dentist. And I said, okay, do what is it you want to do? Do whatever it is you want to do, what's going to make you happy. But he also felt the pressure of, we had a family then. Yeah. So how do you give up that career to go own a pizzeria, which is what he said he wanted to do, pizzeria or a deli.
I'll take a pizzeria. That would be cool.
So a lot more work. That's what I told him. If you think you work hard as a dentist, you're working 15 hours a day to own a pizzeria. But, that was that side of him. That was, I'm not a good dentist, so I need to do something else. But in actuality, he was good at what he did, and his patients loved him. There were patients that came to his wake. I didn't know these people. They came, and I was a patient of your husband's, and so they did love him, but he didn't feel the love from friends, family, patients when he was in that state. When he was in a good state, it was great, and we just never knew how long it would last. We had times that, the longest stretch I could remember was 8 years between episodes. But sometimes it would be 3 years, sometimes 5 years. I never knew when the other shoe was going to drop, and I lived our whole married life when things were good, just waiting for the other shoe to drop because I knew it was coming, because it, like I said, it happened every so many years. I just didn't know how many in between. And that was pretty much how I lived our life, because it was turmoil to sit and like, if it was good, I didn't want to say something that was going to trigger something, and I didn't know, I couldn't figure out, and I still can't figure out what the triggers were for him. I don't know.
I think that's
ever.
something, I mean, there's a few things that we've said in support group that have been helpful for me, at least, and I always make a point to say it to other people, because when they're kind of grieving early on in their loss, they don't understand how a person felt. But we say that you can only love at somebody so much, but for them to feel it is a whole different thing. So it doesn't mean that, like, we didn't love Dad or anything like that. It's just for him, or his patients, or whoever didn't love him, or he didn't have friends. It's that he couldn't feel that. Right. And that's it's hard to come to grips with when you don't quite. There's ways to put it into context, and I think that's one of the ones that helped me understand it, that, like, I did love him, or we did do things for him, and, you know, we tried, but he couldn't feel it. For whatever reason, he couldn't feel it. That's not for lack of anything on our part. But the other thing that we've always said is that there's not really any sort of handbook on how to take care of a person like this, or like a handbook how to grieve a person who've lost like this. I mean, grieving somebody from cancer or a car accident is different than somebody who did this to themselves, essentially, from, you know, they made this choice, and I don't always agree that the choice was always theirs to make. I think it's just part of the disease, but at the same time, it's, yeah, they did this versus cancer did this, or a car accident did this, or anything else, old age. So it's hard to kind of wrap your head around that and understand and grieve the loss, but there's no right or wrong way to do it. And a lot of people tend to think that, oh, I have to go through all these stages and then I'm good. And that's not really how it works either. So,
well, I know you said your recollection went back to 5 years old.
Yeah.
With that night with his first attempt. But did you feel throughout any of your childhood, did you have any other inkling of any of it?
It was all in hindsight.
Well, right, because I kept it hidden from you guys because you were young. And,
I mean,
and you know, it's
the night that Aunt Franny and Uncle Chet came to school to pick me up at 11 o'clock or 11:30, and they said, call you, and I called you, and you said, you know, like, Daddy didn't make it to work today. And I said, well, what happened? Like, where did he go? Did somebody take him? And the whole car ride home with Aunt Fran and Uncle Chet, I just kept saying, like, oh, he went to the bank. Like, somebody must have taken him from the bank. Like, it didn't ever cross my mind that he would have done something to himself. So it was kind of pretty much a shock to me that he would do something, because it never came across that way. But then in hindsight, maybe a year or two later, after I went back to school, I thought about it and was just like, wait a minute, 5 years old, Mom said he had a headache. Like, now that makes sense. So, well, it wasn't anything through those years. It was, I mean, I was shocked. I thought somebody had taken him from the bank. It was like an episode of Law and Order or something. Like, I did not have any real clue. But then after that, it did become more apparent, I think, because obviously all of us knew, and we all had to live here, and we all had to kind of, you know, interact with him in a certain way, or have a fear of, if we said something wrong or did something wrong, like, I didn't clean the litter box, and I thought that's what made him go kill himself. Like, that wasn't a reason why, but I thought that in the beginning, because he hated when I didn't take care of the cat. Like, you know, these stupid things, and that's part of the guilt I've learned, but I've learned to not hate on myself so much for it, because it wasn't me and it wasn't you, and
it wasn't any of us.
No, he was sick, and he was sick,
and that's it. He was sick. It's a disease, like every other disease. Mm-hmm. It's just it's a chronic disease that can be maintained and controlled with proper doctor care and proper medication, and it was for Daddy for many, many years. but people confuse that with other diseases. Somebody has cancer and they'll tell you, I have cancer, I have lung cancer, I have this, or heart disease, or whatever. And years ago, I sound so old, but nobody was ever going to, I know I am, nobody's ever going to say, I suffer from depression and I take medication and I go see a psychiatrist, because it was all taboo.
Yeah.
And it's not like that much anymore, which is a good thing, that people are realizing they can say it and they can open up about it. But that wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
And it made it that much harder, I think, on someone who's suffering, because they're feeling all of these things and know they can't talk about it to somebody.
Yeah.
And when you're someone who was dad, who had this bubbly and gregarious personality and was the loudest person in a room, and everybody always knew when he was around, and you retreat into that hole that he would retreat into, it was instantly noticeable to people if he got that quiet, because dad was never quiet.
Yeah.
So, but not to the point of where people knew what it was, except if you were, like I said, a close family friend or a family member that knew the situation. Somebody might have thought he was just having a bad day.
Yeah, everybody has bad days.
Right. So it was okay. If Fred was off today, he's having a bad day. But that wasn't always the case. Mm-hmm. But I also tried very hard, as you guys were small. There were lots of times you thought he was doing his 2 weeks military duty. Oh. He was away.
Yeah, that's news to me.
And it wasn't military duty all the time. Because, again, how do you explain to a younger child about this type of illness? It's easier to explain to a younger child about cancer and heart disease and stuff. Mental illness is hard to explain to a child. So to protect all of you, when there was a time where he was in, and sometimes it was just maybe a 2 or 3 day stay. Sometimes it could be a 2 or 3 week stay. I just would tell you he had guard duty again. Because you were used to that. You knew once a month he had guard duty, and once a year he had to do his 2 weeks. You grew up with that. So it was just easier to say, he had to do an extra 2 weeks this year, or he had to do an extra weekend, or whatever it was. Or even if it was midweek. Daddy had to go to see Gert for a couple of days for guard duty.
The other time, in hindsight, the other time that I knew something might not have been right was when he came back from Iraq and went to Walter Reed. And you told us, everybody has to go to get checked out before they come home. And that's not really the case, I don't think. And then finding out that he did have an issue and he had to be brought there and taken care of. And
that was probably the beginning of when you
it might have been, I think. I mean, I don't necessarily know, like, throughout college, I don't really remember.
But even then, that was your confirmation that day. So you were, what, 8th grade?
8th grade.
Okay, so 14?
Yeah.
So even then, you knew kind of what was going on, because I had to leave here and go to Maryland. And I took you guys down, like, the following weekend or whatever to visit him, if you remember. They gave him a weekend pass. Remember, we stayed at Aunt Amory's, and Dad came for the weekend. But then when I was driving you guys back to New Jersey, Aunt Amory and Uncle Gary were driving Dad back to Walter Reed.
I don't remember that.
It was a weekend pass, so he can, and we again just made it more of a family weekend vacation in Maryland for you guys. Then, so you still didn't quite understand.
Well,
because no. I didn't necessarily complain.
I know, but if I knew that, I thought maybe it was just like, he got hurt or something, not that he was, or this is protocol, not that it was for that reason.
No, it was for that reason. That he had an episode. He was in Germany. He went to Germany for a week before they moved him to Walter Reed.
I remember that.
So it was, because it's a long, convoluted process to get you home when you're sick. So, but again, it was, okay, so we're going to go to Maryland for the weekend and visit Aunt Amber and Uncle Gary and go do all the little sightseeing stuff we used to do when we would go there. And you guys didn't think anything of it. But if you, and I don't know if you remember correctly, Dad still wasn't his jovial self. He was still a little kind of quiet and reserved. But
I think
I
it
guess
was
you didn't
just
pick up on it.
No, I think it was that I was just more happy to see him after not seeing him for 4 months. So
Right.
And I mean, that sounds like crazy considering some people don't see anybody in the military for years at a time. But I think that was more of, I don't know, I didn't really pick up on that aspect of it. But as you were talking, I was just thinking of maybe other times that it might have come up in my childhood. But I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think it was that bad.
No, yeah, it was ongoing for 27 years, on and off.
Yeah.
And it was something that, even here, look at sometimes, how Dad would get crazy about something like the cat
yeah.
litter or the cat.
That I could see as his like anxiety or something, or the OCD coming through, or
and
whatever.
That was part of it.
Yeah.
Is when he wasn't feeling well, and it could be the cat. It could have been one of you guys that did something stupid, or because none of that stuff would bother Dad when he was feeling fine. He could care less. But when he wasn't feeling fine, everything was exacerbated in his mind hundreds of times over. Mm-hmm. So that made it that much worse and that much harder. And there were times it was difficult living here. You know that too. You wanted to go back to school because you didn't want to.
But I didn't make it at school. I didn't do well. The first 2 weeks I was there, I couldn't do it. Because at that point, I was just too worried about him. So in in hindsight, it didn't really matter. Like, an extra half year of college is not that big a deal, but...
And you did it.
And, yeah. But it's not... I mean, like, his disease did affect us.
Absolutely.
And maybe at the time I didn't think it, or maybe over the years I didn't think, oh, it was that bad, but I mean, it did. It does affect us. It affects anybody in different ways.
It's still affecting us in different ways now.
Yeah.
And I think in one respect, it always will. But it doesn't make him or any of us bad people.
No.
If anything, I think we showed him how much we did love him. Mm-hmm. And he knew that. He did know that. And I know he loved us. But when his episodes started coming, after the second attempt, his episodes started coming every year, not 2 to 3 years, or we'd get a big gap in between. And it became harder for him to live with it. It became harder for me to deal with him living with it.
I think that's part of why he did what he did. And that was one of the turning points for me when I kind of flipped the switch in my head after he died and saying, okay, like, he suffered for so long. And part of this realization comes from going to group and hearing other stories and other perspectives. And that helped me, obviously, in my grief, because I was clearly apparently not doing well. I don't really remember the first couple of years, but...
You were awful, actually.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
But just the idea that he must have known how bad he felt and he couldn't take that anymore, but also knowing how much he hurt us or affected us and not wanting to do that for the rest of our lives too. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've been able to tell myself to kind of move through. And it's almost like ripping off a Band-Aid. I mean, it's hard to say it, but it is, because like he knew. I remember after his second attempt, and we were in the hospital, and I had said to him, like, you have these pictures of us on your dashboard, like, you were in your car all this time, you didn't you didn't see your family there? And he told me, he said, I looked at the picture and I didn't know who those people were. And to me, that was kind of like the turning point also in understanding his depression and how bad it was, that if he didn't know who his family was, that wasn't my dad. It was somebody else or something else that wasn't dad. And those are like part of those are the two things that were clear to me that helped me kind of understand this.
I never knew that.
I don't remember if you were in the room or not, but I did
No,
ask him.
I don't remember ever hearing that.
I asked him, and because I know he had the pictures, and he said that he didn't know who we were, and that was one, his honesty in saying that. I mean, to his child, but I think of maybe, I don't know, of all four of us, I've been the one that wants to talk about it and wants to try and understand him. And I mean, we've had conversations in your room. I remember having conversations sitting on the bed with both of you trying to piece this together. And I have my own issues that I went through and trying to kind of cope with it. And also looking to him because he's coped with it for so long, that like, what did you do? How did you get through this? And help me do it too, kind of thing.
And look at how far you've come now, though. You have reached, I believe, the next step of grief, and have, I don't know if the right word is come to terms, but
No, I think it is.
You have come to terms with Dad's death, where for the longest time you hadn't. And like, you'd get mad when people didn't talk about him, or when his anniversary would roll around and you'd say nobody remembers and whatever, but you would get so upset at the mention of his name for the first 4 years that people wouldn't talk about him in front of you because they didn't want to upset you.
Yeah.
Whereas with me, I always talked about him. I could say his name and it was fine, and people could share a funny story and know it wasn't going to upset me. And you were the polar opposite of that for the longest time. And that's not a bad thing, but that was why nobody has forgotten him. I even asked Bella the other day if she remembered him. Brody doesn't, I don't think, remember him much, but Bella said she does remember him. And but people were afraid to say that to you because of your reaction and how much it upset you.
Yeah.
And now you've reached that next step. You are, and I think the group had helped you tremendously, and now you are a facilitator of your group, and you are a peer mentor for TAPS, and you're helping other people through their grief. And you're right, there's no time limit with any grief.
Yeah.
There's no time limit. But this type of loss is different than any other loss.
Yeah.
And it's like we always said, it's a club nobody wants a membership to.
Yeah.
And we have that membership now through no fault of our own or even Dad's. But the fact that you've now gotten to a place where you're better emotionally handling it and dealing it and can talk about it and can mention Dad's name, can mention the word suicide, can mention mental wellness, which is how we've recoined it, because that's what it is. It's not it's an illness, but there's the wellness side of it that needs to be addressed for people to understand it better, to be able to say the word, to move on, not past, but move on in their life, to build a life, and you've taken those steps now, and I think you're in a much better place than, even 3 years ago. I think you're in a much better place now than you were. No, you've grown emotionally, you've grown, your life has gotten better. You've gotten a promotion and a better job, and you're happier in your life. And I think the happier in your life has also, and you've, like you said, reached or put things in your head to better understand dad, which has helped you move to that next step.
Yeah.
Where prior to, you didn't want to hear what anybody had to say about how to handle any of your grief. And we all handle it differently. Your brother just, after 5 years, just let it all out. That for 5 years we thought he was fine, and he is again now, but it took him 5 years to get to that point.
Yeah.
Yours was instant, and then it stayed there for the same 5 years that it took your brother to let it out. You kept it inside and almost let it control your life for a long time. And now you're not.
That's grief.
No, I know.
Sometimes.
I know.
I think everybody does grieve differently, but
yes. Yeah. And now you're smiling and you're happy, where you were never. I don't know if you realize it.
I don't really remember a lot.
You were not a happy person to be around. You were always upset, and it made things. And none of us could fix that. I couldn't fix it for you, and that's all I wanted to do. That's what a mom does. Is you always want to fix something because you don't want to see your child hurting.
Yeah.
And you were so broken, and I didn't know how to fix it to make you better. And eventually, I had to also realize you had to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
And you did. You did. But it took a long time to get there. And that's okay too. If it took longer, I'd still be here, but it would hurt me to see you hurting so much and that I couldn't fix it for you.
So, in talking about mental wellness, it's not something that's easy to bring up, like chemo or how, maybe even just how somebody's feeling that day if, you're talking at the dinner table. But I think it's also something that someone needs to be almost enthusiastic about in a way, to want to talk about it.
True.
I remember my first day at the program I was at after Dad's second attempt, and it was so helpful for me and so good. And the first day I came home and Dad asked, how did it go? It wasn't even at the dinner table. It was in the basement. I just walked in the door. He came down and how did it go? And I was like spilling all this stuff out. And he goes, wait a minute, like, it's great that you went, but don't be telling me people's personal stories. And I was like, oh, okay, well, but this is how it went. And I remember being so happy and excited to feel like it was something that was helping me. So I think that may be part of why people don't want to freely talk about it all the time. Whereas if, like, somebody's going through a health crisis or chemo or whatever, and, oh, it's helping me, or maybe, like, no, it isn't, but this is what they're doing, and this is what they're planning, and there's a different sense to it than just, how's therapy going? Because it can be personal, but if somebody were to ask me that and I were still going to therapy, I would say, oh, like, it's going, or it has its ups and downs. I might not get into my details about what I talk about, but at least I'm enthusiastic about going. And that was my savior for a long time, was every Thursday going to therapy, and that sort of thing. But people who may not be as happy about it or want to go to it or feel like it's helping, they're probably not going to want to talk about it. But
why is that? Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think it's just obviously one of those things that people don't really want to talk about to begin with. But
I think it has to do with the stigma behind it.
Yeah. Mental wellness is just, it's something that's just not really freely talked about. And I'm happy to see that I think now, which unfortunately coming after a pandemic and all of the other residual effects from that, I think now people are starting to have curriculum in schools or at college and, like, in the town and community about this subject. But it's long overdue, and it shouldn't have taken a pandemic to get to that point that people start talking about it. And yeah, it has. But okay, so now let's take that and let's run with it. Like, keep talking about it. keep, asking people about how they felt maybe even before the pandemic. Was this something that you might have noticed about yourself? I mean, I think for me, growing up as a child, I had high functioning anxiety, but was never treated for it. And
from first grade,
those things. But now you look at it when there's more talk about it and more information out about it. I mean, I look at myself and I totally was an anxious child, but I was never medicated. I didn't go to therapy. I mean, things that back then maybe could have been done, it just wasn't addressed in that way because it wasn't something that was talked about enough to say, oh, maybe we should, send her to somebody or, that sort of thing. But I think the mental wellness part it has to be talked about. The downside that I do see to some of this, and I hear it all the time in group, and it's unfortunate, is that people can't afford it, or they feel like sometimes psychiatrists or therapists are not really, like, they're not doing their jobs. And I'm not saying that as like my opinion. I'm saying it is what I'm hearing from multiple people, that they've gone to these things and it isn't working. But I think it takes a while. You have to be comfortable with somebody. You have to find the right type of therapy, because people do so many different kinds of therapy, and that was something that I learned very quickly in the program that I was in, the different types of therapy. And every day we had a session of each of the different types.
When you were at High Focus?
Yes.
Okay.
To be able to, find what's best for you after you leave the program, what's the best type of therapy that's going to help you and that you're going to continue doing for your own health and your own benefit. But I think that with the influx of people that are now seeking out these services and the amount of people that may be available to provide these services, you can also, that I think is a downside, you could run into a rut where people are either overbooked or they only spend a few minutes with you versus being able to spend a lot of time to talk with you and understand and diagnose you properly, or etc. That we need more people in that field to help others. I know it's a business too, so that's a hard part, but that's where our mental wellness campaign kind of comes in, that
right.
we try.
Well, for the longest time, insurance companies did not recognize any type of mental wellness.
Yeah.
At all. And it was always pay out of pocket, which Dad and I did numerous times. Mm-hmm. I had to borrow money from family members to pay for High Focus when you, Dad, and Anthony were all in it at the same time. The co-pays were astronomical for 3 people. Mm. But we did it because it needed to be addressed. You all needed help. So we got it done. But there are people that don't have that advantage. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be better programs set up from a state level, from a federal level, to help people like that. And like you said, now with the pandemic and government recognizing that there were so many adults who were stuck in for the last year or two, and children that are dealing with this, I think we will start to see more funds and insurance companies cover more to become more available to help. But it's a long time in coming.
Yeah.
Long time. Even the military, after, I think it was after Dad's second attempt, because by then they've started to recognize mental issues and PTSD as it related to the military, that it was a problem. Yeah. They actually did call me, one of the hospitals, the military hospitals, the VA in, I think, South Orange or somebody, actually called to see if Dad needed any treatment, a doctor, and so on. And by then we had our own doctors and private stuff set up. So I was like, no, thank you. But that was the first time in all the time that he was in the military and sick that they remotely acknowledged that there was any type of issues. And that's what the federal and the state governments have to start doing now for people too, because there are so many people out there that, and again, those people who don't want to talk about it, well, we don't know Joe Schmo down the block is dealing with something because he didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And understandably so. It is a personal thing and a private thing, but because of the stigma and how people do react, that's why people are afraid to say it.
Yeah.
But if you don't say it, or if you don't reach out for help, no one's ever going to know to be able to help you. And that was why I wanted to be so upfront about Dad's illness and never tried to hide it. I wrote that letter at the wake that was then published by the South Bergenite when they did that whole article about it. And I did have, and actually people had asked me that back then to post it on Facebook as well. And I did. And someone did reach out to me and say to me, I want you to know you saved a life this week. I had a friend that I could not reach after days of trying, and called his ex-wife to say, I haven't been heard from him and whatever. And the ex-wife contacted the police where they were living. I think it was in one of the Carolinas or something. And the man was suffering from depression and suicidal, and he got the help he needed. So she said to me, I want you to know that, yes, your article and your openness helped save my friend's life. Yeah. And that was right in the beginning. And I've had some people who have, over the years, call me that, hey, can I talk to you? Because I'll tell anybody. I'll talk to them. I'll listen. I'm not a doctor. Yeah. I am not a therapist. I can give you my opinion from my past experiences, but please don't take what I say as a doctor or whatever. And people have called and talked to me, sometimes way into the night.
I think that society just needs more people willing to talk and listen to others, even if they're a professional or not. I mean, there's many people who don't want to even address any of this, but just being able to be an ear for somebody, whether or not you're a professional, I think that helps people to also continue to talk about it.
Right, but people have to get over there. Family members need to get over the shame of someone who maybe has died of suicide versus someone who's died of anything else. There's no shame when someone had cancer or had a heart attack or whatever. And if there is a person who feels suicidal or is depressed or has already attempted and survived, they also need to learn that there was no shame in that either. Yeah. People have survived having a heart attack. People have survived having cancer. They got treatment. They were cured or in remission. And again, there's no cure for this, but you can learn to live with it because it's a chronic. Yep. It's not a terminal disease. It doesn't have to be a terminal disease. It's a chronic disease. It's a chronic illness, and you can live with it. You have to work hard to manage it. You have to extremely hard. Yeah. Extremely hard. But you have to get past that someone's going to look at you differently. And there always will be people that will. Yeah. So, and it's hard to know who that person might be. Yeah. I think people know they can come to us because we are very vocal about it. But they may not think that, they can talk to some other person on the street or another friend, like someone's best friend. They may think is their best friend, but I know I can't talk to them about this because they're going to think I'm different.
And that, for me, that's where kind of like the support group came in. I mean, especially in the past few months, I've heard a lot of people saying that they're really grateful to have a group that, people can talk to about that, because they don't feel comfortable talking to anybody else about it, which is, it's nice to hear, but it's also sad at the same time that you can't feel comfortable talking to your friends about it or to your family, and like you're talking to basically a group of strangers, but we all have something in common. And I think that's the key, that they feel like you understand the concept, or you understand the feelings that go along with it. You understand the process, and it's there's no right or wrong, but being open to have people talk to you about it is, I think, one of the biggest things. And that's part of also why I went to group to begin with. I think because for me, talking to you or to my therapist or to like Franny or somebody was not, I felt like I was kind of a broken record sometimes, and I didn't want to keep doing that. But also, everybody else was also a broken record right back to me. Like, there's only so many things that you can say to somebody from a certain perspective. Like, my therapist, only a therapist, she didn't actually experience a loss. But when you talk to people who've experienced it, maybe not necessarily in your same family or friend group or whatever, who've also experienced a loss too. So I don't know, it's hard to explain, but the group was somewhere that I sat there, and I will take a line from somebody else who says that she finally sat in a room of people that got it. And yes, you get
Mm-hmm.
it. It's something you don't want to meet a person this way, but I mean, I've made connections with people through that and through peer mentoring, and it's like, it's just because of this unfortunate thing. But at the same time, we're also working to create that conversation and keep that conversation going, because it has to be talked about.
Right.
There's no way around it. It has to be talked about.
And think of that, the people that you're helping, now that you've reached the better place of understanding more in your grief and that next step. So you're helping by mentoring and facilitating your group to help those eventually possibly get to that better place. I mean, we're fortunate that I've never, Dad and I I don't have a lot of friends, but we have our core group of friends, and I've not lost one of them through any of this. We have our family that surrounds us, most of, but we have, I have the friends, and not one has stopped talking to me. And there are times I kind of feel like a third wheel sometimes, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. But they've always included me in things. We still do things together, that we, who goes out to dinner, who goes to a Broadway show with me, who does whatever. Not one of them has left, where some people don't have that, because other people will look at this as that type of death, that it was like, oh, they did that, I don't want to be around her anymore, or I don't want to be around him anymore, or they're always so sad, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. And yet nobody has ever walked away. And I think part of it too is because they themselves understand, what it was. And not all of our friends knew, but most of them did. Because I was always very open and honest with people about Dad's illness. I never really shied away from it. And I think that's what helped me cope all those years. The only people I didn't were you guys, because I was trying to protect you guys.
You were,
But all of our other friends and family pretty much did know and understood and accepted Dad the way he was, good or bad. And it was just the way of getting through raising you guys and dealing with that as well, that I kind of had to skirt it.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, again, not something, you don't go to grammar school and learn about mental illness or mental wellness. And maybe they should, because it's starting younger and younger and younger now, which is so sad.
I think now they might be adding in like more things, because I think part of it is that they almost have to, that
right.
Yeah, it's
exactly.
starting younger and younger, and there's no other way around it.
I mean, when you have 10-year-olds, there was somebody not too long ago that 10 years old.
Yeah.
I could never fathom in my life how someone could think at 10 their life was so bad to want to do that.
Unfortunately, I've heard the story, I think, one too many times that somebody literally didn't know that this was going to happen. I'm thinking of a particular young person, and the only notice that they even had was not even notice, it was after the fact, reading their diary, that they felt this way, but they never had any signs outward, but yet they were holding all of this in. And it's so hard to figure out what to say to triage that, or like check in. I mean, I definitely, when I hear these stories, we've always heard people say it just like teaches me to be kinder to people and to try to, check in with somebody a little more often, even if they're not telling the truth. That's not something that you can control, which is the like hard part of, I guess, understanding that, is that you can't control what everybody's gonna say, if they're gonna tell the truth about, oh, I'm feeling this way or not. But I think the least that you can do is just check in with somebody. How you feeling today? Or maybe if you notice that they're just not their normal selves, like, hey, you're not, you don't seem like you're happy today or something. Is there something I can do for you? To at least let somebody know that you're there. I think a lot of people think that they are just so alone, and that may not be the case. And it's, if people just continue to let people know that they are in their circle and there for them to talk to, or vent to or cry to, it could make a difference. And there's probably people that are already doing that, but it's I think it's one of those things that is never going to have, mental wellness is never going to have like a cure or anything like that. And we've said that there's no cure to it, but just trying to be a little kinder, even if you're having a bad day, like hoping that maybe somebody else would also understand that and be a little kinder too. But this isn't a perfect world, so I don't think there is any perfect solution to a lot of things, and this being one of them, because it's just so abstract. It's not straightforward. But hearing people say that they had no signs or nothing, or in hindsight they look back and say, oh, that could have been, whereas like you kind of knew, like you knew that he was feeling this way, and you knew that something was not right. But
I'd learn every episode. I learned something new, because don't forget, when Dad and I first got married, and I had never dealt with mental illness, and had to put him in the hospital a year after we were married. So I learned a little bit then, and then the next bout, which wasn't for another 3 or 4 years, because we were back in Jersey City then, I'd see something else that was like, oh, he's not quite right. It was a learning process. The whole 27 years
and
was a learning process.
you at least got to get that. There are some people who have none of that, like no warning signs, no nothing, and just like out of the blue.
True.
So I think those are the harder ones to try and figure out, because you literally have nothing to go on.
When you were talking about checking in with a person, it's not just the first year.
Yeah.
It could be 10 years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
But the further out it goes, the less people think about that.
Yeah.
To say, hey, she's having a bad day, or hey, I haven't talked to her in a while. Let me just check in, see how she's doing,
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, okay, it's been 7 years, it's been
Yeah.
10 years, they're good,
I think that's part of like a grief stigma in a way, that like I don't think it matters what kind of grief, but I mean, it could be any significant loss to something else too, that as grief moves on, I think it's just part of what happens, and it's part of life in a way that people may not tend to remember all the time, because it's been so long. And I think an assumption is that people are going to be like more okay as time goes on, and for some it's not always the case. That I've heard a lot of people also saying that as time goes on it gets worse for them because they've been without that person for so much longer. And I'm not even just talking like to suicide loss, but just like not having that person with them. And it gets harder moving forward in their world, where other people might think, oh, it's been 6 years, 5 years, they're okay. And I, I think that's just part of anything. And it again, it's something that's like, it's not a perfect world. Like, I don't know that there's any real answer to try and like fix any of these things that are happening. But I, yeah, I've just, the more talking about it and the more just trying to be some, as best you can, be somebody to listen or to be there for somebody could be the best thing in the world for somebody, and you may never know it.
I know when I'm having a crappy, sometimes I like to have a pity party myself.
I do too.
And I will, I'll scroll through my phone to the week of Dad's disappearance and death, and read through all the posts and comments for that day, or that week. Have myself a good cry, move on. There are times where I'll pick up the phone and call somebody and just say I'm having a bad day today, or whatever, and talk to them and talk it through and so on, and or sometimes I'll just listen to some music that was one of our favorite songs or something, or Paradise by the Dashboard Light, because we always sang that at family parties, and think back to those memories. And then I can laugh about it.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily crying. I'm laughing about it. Or our last trip to Hawaii, that was our dream vacation, and we did it. So, there's numerous different ways, and then there's times I just walk around here and mope. Sometimes.
I don't think I thought we were a little bit different in how we move through things, but I guess not, because I also do go back and kind of look at that week, things I have saved. I think because for me sometimes it's just I need a reminder in a way. Like some days I'm just like, I can't even believe that crap happened. Like there's been times that I'm maybe talking to somebody and they may not know the extent of what happened, and you kind of like joke about it in a way, because like it's like, oh, like, yeah, this happened, and then it's kind of like crickets on the other end, and they're like, oh, that's pretty bad. And then you don't think that it's that bad until you go back and you're like, oh, it was pretty bad. Because I think I've developed almost like not an immunity, but like I've just learned how to, that's part of my life. I've just learned how to deal with it now and learn how to make it a part of my life, so it's easy to kind of, I guess, or easier to bring up, or to just like make a haha, oh yeah, this happened or whatever. But it's in reality, outside of my world, it's actually a really like terrible, insane thing that there's also times that I can't believe that it happened either. So I need sometimes those reminders, and I do go back and I look at pictures and I look at, like messages from people, and I actually, one of the coping tools that I used maybe 2 years ago was writing down everything that I remembered from that week. Almost like a blog entry. And it ended up being 14 pages and pretty detailed. And I thought about posting it, but then I thought, no, this isn't really postable material. It's something for me. So
But it helped you?
It helped me, okay. And if I need to kind of have a moment, I go back and I look at it, and it's, again, my reminder. But it's not just a reminder of the bad. It's a reminder of, look, you got through this. Like, you're strong enough to get through something like this. So, just keep going. And then, yeah, there's times that I just want to sit and cry, and I usually cry when reading or looking at things, but it's the cathartic part of it. Like, sometimes I just cry out of random frustration, and that's different, but crying for that, And then unfortunately there's times like this week I saw the picture of Dad that I have at work, and I almost was like, I don't know who you are, like I don't remember you. And that's one of the things that's always scared me from day one, was I'm not going to remember him. But I think that's part of it, because again, like, we're moving forward and he's not there. So it's like one of those things that you want that person there, but to remember the last time you talked to him, or like the last time that you saw him, and it's hard because the length of time is growing, and it's not going to go back, and he's not coming back. So you have to deal with that idea of the length of time, and he's still not going to be here. But he's in like my memories, and he's in my phone, and videos and all the things that we have. But for me, that's one of the hard parts. And at that point, I just kind of have to be like, okay, well, I know who you are, but right now my brain is choosing not to remember you, or not to recall any sort of thing. And
remember last summer when we sat and we watched all those family videos down
Yeah.
the shore?
and I
And
mean,
it took you all these years to get to that point to want to
well,
do that.
yes, but that's something I kind of thought, oh, I'll be fine. I won't have to go through the life like forgetting him. But it happens, and the day that it happened was actually a group night for me, and I made a point to be there, and I had said it, and somebody else in the group who was about 15 years nodded her head, and she said, yeah, I've had those moments too. And I'm like, oh, I'm not alone. Again, like the feeling, I'm not alone in the things that I think, or the way that I cope with something. But there's times that, yeah, you just want to kind of kick and scream and just cry, and that works. But then there's the other times I want a pint of ice cream, and then you have that too. So
Okay.
I think that I don't think there's any right or wrong way to grieve either, because it's just how you kind of get yourself to
Get through
Get through.
that moment in time.
get through the day. I mean, sometimes sleep is easy for people, sometimes it's hard just getting through, and then the next day is a new day, and you try to continue through. I mean, for people who have much worse depression, or much worse like time coping with this, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that medical advice or a therapist would be helpful. But
Well, if
for
they
me,
want to harm
it's
themselves, then
yeah.
you have to
Um,
get them help.
But I mean, I think I've been much better in the last year or two about not having all of these moments like a lot. It used to be every week or so that I would feel these things, or I would need like, my day of crying. But now it's kind of becoming further and further, and
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's a sign that you are heading to that next step in your grief process. I still, once in a while, I have the last voice message Daddy sent when he got that job.
I know, I saved it on my phone too.
Oh, you have it?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think it was just last week I listened to it again. Every once in a blue moon, I'll, pop it on just to listen. But it makes me smile. It doesn't
Yeah.
upset me. It makes me smile just to hear his voice and know he was happy that day.
Yeah.
And excited, about starting a new position and stuff. And so it's a good thing. It's more of a make me feel good
Yeah.
voice message than anything else. So, but everybody has different ways of what helps them cope and helps them move to the next step. And that next step can still be miles away, or it could be a shorter time. It just all depends. I know Dad would want us to move on and to be happy, because that was the dad was always happy, essentially. So that's what he would want for all of us, is to just be happy and live life and get out on that dance floor and dance like Ralph Cramden, which I do. I figured my job in life now is just to embarrass all of you.
Well.
So, but that's what he'd want for us. And I know that. I believe that deep down in my heart. I know he'd want us all to be happy.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is the biggest testament, I guess, for lack of a better word, that we could give to him.
Yeah. I know that.
Is to move on and to be happy in our life. And, I mean, he comes and visits you all the time.
I know. He's got a goofy face on when he does, so I know he's okay.
Right. See, he is.
I know he's okay.
And I think that's why he visits you all the time, to let you know, hey, I'm good, I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know, I've only dreamt of him twice or 3 times in 7 years.
Yeah.
You know, but you're like every couple of months he comes and pops
Depends
in and
on the
says
year.
hello. So, you know, and I think it's just to reassure you, I'm still doing good.
Yeah.
So
I know.
you know, and that, I think, helps you in turn.
Yeah.
To be able to. I think he knew, you know, I'm okay, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that it was more you he needed to concentrate on.
Yeah.
And I think he's done that. And you've accepted it.
Yes.
And kind of took the next step finally, which would help. And that's why I think that's what makes him happy now too, is to know he knows, okay, she's in a better place now than she was.
Yep.
So if you think of that,
Oh, I know. I do. I think of that. I know.
that's what he's telling you.